Welcome to episode 6 of the SRC ECC Child Rights Series for 2025. This forum in particular aims to raise awareness and strengthen advocacy around the issue of child labor, both globally and within the Jamaican context. We will take a closer look at Jamaica's regulatory framework and the actions being taken to uphold children's rights and protect them from exploitative labor. And we'll also be discussing the alignment with the observance of, or rather this discussion aligns with the observance of World Day Against Child Labor that we often forget. This was recognized on June 12th. And we're going to be reinforcing the urgent call for collective responsibility in ending this harmful practice. If you're new to this space, I'm Winsome Sharia-Witter, your host, moderator for this segment, and I'll be joined by Dr. Warren Thompson, Director of Children and Family Programs at the Child Protection and Family Services Agency. Most of you know it as CPFSA. We hope to be joined by Dr. Ngidi from a visionary founder and director of Institute of Africology from South Africa. We have a big time difference, so just in case. But not to worry, we have with us Yvette Edwards Wilson, Senior Inspector Region 6 at the Early Childhood Commission, who will be guiding us through this discussion. And as always, we're talking about early childhood. So we're going to start with the foundational stuff. Welcome, Dr. Warren Lady Wilson.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me too.
And I must pause to recognize Dolores Griffiths, who was on before 8 p.m. Thank you for tuning in. And for the others who are there, remember, don't keep this to yourself. Share it with others so they too can join in on the conversation. A very sobering conversation, timely conversation that we'll be having. And we trust that this is the beginning of this conversation and that you'll continue in your respective spaces. So let's lay the foundation for the conversation. All right, I'm going to mute you, Doc, getting a feedback there. All right. So what is child labor and how is it different from child work or chores?
That's a question for me?
Yeah.
All right.
What's the definition for child labor? Because sometimes people might see the parents giving them chores and think that they're put to labor.
The most simple definition, or the simplest definition I can give you, is child labor is any work that compromises a child's right to an education and the child's right to play. Now, of course, the law is much more nuanced than that. So in Jamaica, and of course, our legislation would have been crafted based on the different ILO conventions, that's the International Labour Organization, as well as the Convention on the Rights of the Child. In the Child Care and Protection Act, child labor is, well, let me put it this way. No child under 13 is allowed to work. And we can talk about what we mean when we say work. So no child under 13 is allowed to work. Between 13 and 15, the child is able to do what the law refers to as light work. So the child can do light work. And then at 15, the child is able to work full-time, but the child cannot work in any environment that is hazardous or that poses a risk to his or her health or well-being. And the child cannot work in an environment that exposes the child to moral danger. In other words, the child can't work in a nightclub, a massage parlor, in a bar. The child can't work, do any kind of adult work, really. So you're talking about, personal services, sex work, and so on. At 15, the individual, at 18, the individual is no longer a child and is able to work anywhere he or she chooses. So in a nutshell, that is what our child labor law says. There's one caveat though. Under 13, the child can work in so much as the child's work is in an artistic endeavor, or for example, like a sporting activity or the child can sing, dance, act, whatever it is, the child can be paid for that, but it cannot be at the expense of the child's schooling or time for the child to have play and recreation. So that really is child labor in a nutshell.
Oh, fantastic. That's good to hear, because we advocate for the children being a part of the arts, the creative space,
Right.
because I believe it helps them. Let me pause to welcome Dr. Deslandes. Thank you for joining us. Nardia, thank you for being here with us. Before we move on, Dr. Thompson, tell us about the logo that you have in the background there, for those who are wondering, what's that behind you?
So this is our 211 logo. I'm shifting so you can see it a little bit better. 211 is the number that we have for all persons to report child protection concerns. So once you are aware, once you believe that a child has been abused or neglected, is being abused or neglected, or is likely to be abused or neglected, then you can make a report simply by calling 211. So 211 is a toll-free line, so there are no charges to the callers in Jamaica. Once you're calling from, the networks here, Floor Digital, then there are no charges for those calls. And we also operate on a 24-hour basis. So there are officers who are working our call center to receive your calls and to appreciate the information that you have regarding a child who is, or you believe, in need of care and protection. I want to just list out what do I mean when I say a child protection concern. So we look for a number of things. So physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, and for neglect, we're talking about educational neglect, neglect for the child's health care, neglect for the child's basic needs, and lack of supervision. It also includes child labor and child trafficking. And we also have a category that we call the child who's otherwise in need of care and protection. So that's a child who is not necessarily being abused or neglected, but there are circumstances that causes the child to be in need of care and protection. For example, it could be a child who is not being sent to school, and it's not because the parents are intentionally choosing not to send the child to school, but the parents don't have the resources, so they don't have the money to send the child to school. It could be a child who is living in a household with a convicted offender for a child abuse offense. That is a child who is also in need of care and protection. It could be a case where the child has a particular health need that the parents are unable to satisfy, but it's not because they don't want to, but they may not have the wherewithal to do so. So it's a very broad and expansive category. It also includes the child who is in moral danger. So a child who is seen, wandering the streets, or a child who is seen, near a bar or buying cigarettes, those kinds of things.
Thank you so much for that very useful information that I'm sure that we all can benefit from as we move forward. So as we continue laying the foundation for this topic that we're looking at, stop child labor, Yvette, let's bring you into the conversation. What forms of child labor have you observed in our space?
One of the most popular ones that I've observed is seeing those young boys at the street lights. As soon as you drive up, they're ready and available to get your windscreen cleaned. I've also observed some young children as well, boys and girls, when I'm on the mall. They're always selling little candies. Sometimes they're selling housewares. And so it is a concern that we continue to see in Jamaica. And sometimes in the markets too, you will find some young children doing the same, selling, maybe they're selling alongside their parents, or sometimes they're there on their own, doing their selling their wares as well. And so I think this is a serious topic that we, need to be looking a bit more seriously on. I know there are laws that we have that address this issue, but I'm not seeing where the parents of these children are being contacted or held accountable for what their children are engaged in, in child labor.
All right, Dr. Thompson, you look like you're ready to weigh in on that. So let's go right ahead.
I wanted to add to what Mrs. Edwards-Wilson said, that we see children in working in different kinds of environments. And the truth is, there's nothing wrong with a child helping out the family, right? So the family may, let us say they sell at the market, and they may take the children to the market with them some days for the child to assist. And, the child learns the family business and participates in that way. However, as I said, it cannot be at the expense of the child's schooling, and the child must also have time for play and recreation. And the child cannot be selling, for example, going off on his or her own, and without supervision, and being put in a situation where there is a risk of harm. That being said, there are some people who think that chores and assisting the family in that way is child labor, but it really is not. There are a lot of things that children learn by participating in the family. One of the things I can tell you, my wife always says, is that in the family, everybody has a role to play. Everybody has to pull their weight, as it were. So the children have to learn, the discipline of doing chores and perhaps helping out and so on. But it cannot be at the expense of the child's schooling. Now, I'm not sure how much it happens now, but many of you may be aware of cases where, particularly in agricultural communities, where children are withheld from school, like on a Friday, to assist whether in harvesting or in taking things to the market and so on. That is child labor, because the child is not being sent to school on a particular day in order that he or she can help out on the family farm. And I mean, 10 years ago when I was doing teaching, I saw this happening. I remember one mother who was very, very upset that the student was not performing well in school, because she worked so hard, and even the child had to stay from school some days to help her out, without even thinking that keeping the child from school was in fact a breach. So it does happen. The other thing I want to add is, we see children on the streets, working on the streets, but there are forms of child labor that are, I want to say, more extreme, that we do not necessarily see in our day-to-day. So we're talking about children who are working and being exploited in agricultural settings. So they're working on farms, in the hills, or wherever, and we're not seeing them. Children who are brought to work on fishing vessels, so they go out to sea and they're on fishing vessels for days, and we think that they're okay, but they're not okay. Some of them are, and there's a fine line between child labor and child trafficking, because there are some of them who are being paid to work, but what they're being paid is way, way, way below standard. It's really nothing, and they're working in some harsh environments, perhaps without access to a bathroom. They don't have their, free will to do as they please. They can't leave when they want to leave, and so on. So those are some extreme forms that we do have, but we don't, see in the day-to-day basis. At the CPFSA, we have taken note of the issue of children living and, well, not living, but working on the streets. We don't have many children living on the streets in Jamaica. Many of the children that we see working on the streets actually live somewhere with their families, but they are sent, or they choose to go and work on the streets. And we have tried many things here at the CPFSA. We would sometimes target some of the locations, go and pick them up, and sometimes they'll get so used to us that when they see the vehicles coming, they run. I've had some of them thinking that I'm a police officer. Maybe it's because of how I look, I don't know. But we've tried different things. And one of the things that we're doing now, we did a study in 2019 on street and working children in Jamaica. And we identified some top communities from which these children come. So I think there are about 8 communities from which the children that we see on the streets are coming from. We have a civil society organization now that is implementing a project under CPFSA's guidance and support. And the project is aimed at supporting the families and supporting the community to be more protective so that the children would not want to leave those environments to go and work, to make money so that they can go to school or, to meet other basic needs that they might have. So the way in which we're approaching it is to support the community and the family to be more of a protective environment for the children to mitigate them leaving to go and work on the streets. So that is going on as we speak.
Awesome. So you mentioned earlier in terms of farming, fishing, and based on the information that you have, the data to date, are you able to share with us what that data is saying as it relates to child labor? Are there specific regions, urban as opposed to rural, or specific sectors outside of farming and fishing that we see a prevalence in?
So unfortunately, I am not able to give you the kind of breakdown that you want. But what I can share though is that what is it called now? So the Ministry of Labor and Social Security has a child labor risk model. And the risk model suggests that about 54,000 children in Jamaica are actually in child labor circumstances. The Jamaica Youth Activity Survey that was done, if I recall, it could have been somewhere between 2016 and 2018, so it's actually dated, suggested that there were over 38,000 Jamaican children that were in child labor scenarios. And about 26,000 of those, I believe, were in environments that are considered to be hazardous. So they were working in environments where they were exposed to dangerous equipment, or in environments where there was a risk of harm, or they were being exploited, right? So that data is there. Unfortunately, let me put it this way, at the CPFSA, we only, because the truth is, some of this is cultural. So there are many Jamaicans who will not report a child labor situation. And very often they may report another child protection concern. And from assessing the narrative that the reporters give, we realize that the child is a victim of child labor and code it as such. But each year we only receive maybe around anywhere around 300 cases, children in child labor situations. So there's not a lot of reporting. But when we do the surveys, the prevalence surveys, we realize that there are children who are in situations that are indicative of child labor.
Are there any of those situations that you could share so that those who are viewing can be able to spot them without going into specifics?
I should ask me before I came on. I think, as I said, a lot of it is very similar to child trafficking. So you have to look for children, of course, who are not being sent to school. That's one thing. So if there's a child that you are aware is not attending school, then we have to investigate that, because it could very well be a child labor situation. That's one of the indicators. Look for children who, if they do go to school, as they leave school, they're not able to play, they're not able to relax and have fun. They might have to go to work. And in some instances, their parents or caregivers are sending them to work. So there's forced begging. So some children are forced to beg. That's really child trafficking and not so much child labor. There's forced selling. Children who are forced to sell, perhaps are given a quota to go and sell and bring in the returns. That again is forced labor, but under the child trafficking category. Look for children who are working, but they're working in situations where they're not able to live as they please. Their wages are not being paid. Children who are often very tired, so they might come to school. When they come to school, they are exhausted, so they can't really pay any attention to what is happening in school because they are tired and have to rest to go back to work in the evenings. Those are some of the indicators I would say. But if persons are interested, if you Google online, you'll find many other indicators. And I want to also share that the indicators very often cross incident types. So an indicator for child labor may very well also be an indicator for child trafficking, because the child may be working in an environment where they're sexually exposed, an environment where they kind of have to grow up very quickly, those kinds of things.
Very insightful, because I never thought about that cross there in terms of child trafficking being so closely knit with child labor. So that's
Right.
very important for us to take note of. Thank you so much. Do you have any info for us on a global, in the global space, as to what other countries are doing to tackle child labor, and what lessons we here in Jamaica can learn from those
I think
spaces?
so. As I mentioned, there's a very fine line. So very often the work that is being done to tackle child labor is the same work being done to tackle child trafficking. Because of course, under child trafficking, forced labor is one type. I want to, in addition to that, there's what we call, or refer to as the worst forms of child labor. And you're looking at children who are engaged in child prostitution, and that is where there's somebody who is supporting a child prostitute. Children who are engaged in producing what we call, we refer to it as child pornography, but the new language now is child sexual abuse material, because there's this idea that even if the child willingly participates, those who are consuming the product are not just consuming pornography, but are consuming the sexual abuse of the child. So we refer now to child sexual abuse material, CSAM. So I can't say what the global data is, but what I can say is that a number of government and civil society organizations are coming up with different kinds of strategies to prevent and to mitigate child labor. One of the things they require that certain companies, for example, make commitments and make statements that they're operating in an ethical way and are not employing child laborers. So very often you might find companies that have to put out those kinds of statements and have to say what it is that they're doing to ensure that in their, what they call that now, in their supply chain, they don't have child labor, or they don't have child laborers participating in that supply chain. Let me give an example. I recently went to a little get together, and someone there was serving chocolates. And the person was surprised by the question I asked, are these ethically produced chocolates? And there were three of us here, so the other person was surprised that I asked the question. And I explained, and the other person who I asked the question actually understood. And both of us explained that I asked the question because in chocolate manufacturing, that is an industry where they do have child labor. So they have children who are picking the cocoa plants, who are working in the factories to grind the cocoa plants, and those children are paid low wages or no wages at all, or are not able to go to school, and so on. So in the chocolates produced in Belgium and elsewhere, in their supply chain, they have child laborers. So they have to do some work. The government and the private sector organizations have to work together to ensure that the supply chain is free of child labor, and then they can boldly say that these chocolates are ethically produced. We have not been doing those kinds of things in Jamaica, but perhaps it is time for us to begin to do so. So we're producing banana chips. We might need to have our companies make commitments and have the labor inspectors go out to verify that they don't have child laborers working on the banana plantations or in the banana chips factories. So those are some of the things that are being done around the world. Even in the tourism sector, hotel chains have to be proving that they don't have child laborers working in producing the little soaps that they use, posing as adults, housekeepers, those kinds of things. Because around the world, business owners have found very innovative and, let me say, clandestine ways of incorporating the abuse of children in their business. I don't know if that is sufficient a response.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. All right. Andrea Edwards Brown is sharing this. That is an interesting recommendation. And we have Alvin Coleman. Good evening to you, being informed so far. So you're connecting with the viewers, which is very important. And you went nicely into the next segment as it relates to the importance of education and community involvement as tools to tackle this situation. So let's explore the intersection with this issue. In terms of the role, what role does education play in empowering young people to resist exploitative labor practices? Because even as adults, we ourselves don't understand the demarcation between chores sometimes and labor and all those differences. So how do we help the young people?
Well, before I answer that, let me say, I think if I recall correctly, there's a number that has been floated around to say that children should not do chores for more than 14 hours per week.
Interesting.
Right? That number has been floated around. And if you think about it, you're looking at more than 2 hours of chores per day, right? So children shouldn't do more than 2 hours of chores per day. And that's because if the child is going to school and they should play, then you really only have maybe another 2 hours where they can actually do things around the house and so on. Now, education has been proven to be a protective factor in the life of a child. Well, if the child has and I want to say, when I talk about education, we shouldn't just think about children. We have to think about the family in general. I think schools in particular have a particular role in influencing families. And of course, in the past, when I've spoken to early childhood practitioners, I have given even my own personal experiences as a child where I had questions that my own mother could not answer. And, in her wisdom, she went to the teacher and said, asked the teacher, how do I answer this question? And the teacher gave her a way of answering, and she was able to come back to me and answer the question. So I think schools play a very important role in the life of communities to ensure that families have the answers and have the information as they try to raise their children. So in schools, we have to teach children about rights, first of all, what their rights are, as well as their responsibilities, of course. And as we teach them about child labor and sensitize them to exploitation and sensitize them to this idea that even if they were to work, there are certain kinds of work that they should not be engaging in, or that they should always have opportunities for play and to relax and to connect with friends and so on. If schools are teaching that kind of message, then I think then our young people will be able to be more sensitized to the issue of child labor, and I want to say to exploitation in general, and are then able to play a role in protecting themselves. I think families and communities in general have a role to play in protecting children. Once we get information out there, we let them, as I mentioned earlier, many times when people come called to report a child protection concern, they are not aware that they are reporting child labor. And I think we have to get the information out there that this is what this is. And this is something that is not good, not right. Very often people report and they say the people are taking, as we say in Jamaica, disadvantage. They're taking advantage of the child, but they are not able to specifically say that the child is being exploited or that this is a situation of child labor. So it's very, very important that we get the education out there. And the other thing too we have to also sensitize people to the fact that modern day slavery exists. So not all children in child labor settings are really, in slavery scenarios, but it perhaps starts there. We have to get people sensitized to the fact that there are certain work arrangements that are not right, both for children and for adults. They are not right. And as communities, armed with the information, we have to then hold people accountable. So hold our business owners accountable, and government has a role to play in that. In fact, but so the education system has a key role to play in getting the information out there. Many years ago, when I was teaching social studies, taught many things, music, social studies. But many years ago, when I was teaching social studies, I remember we had content on human trafficking that was being taught, and the young people were not. Yes, they may have been aware that the people have been exploited in various ways, but they weren't thinking about human trafficking as something that could happen to them. They weren't thinking about it as something that is really, and I'm saying this very loosely, a crime against humanity. It is harkening back to slavery. So education has a key role to play. I think I'm talking too much, but I can't say it enough. Education and educators have a key role to play in getting the information out there, not only to children, but also to families and the wider community.
Someone said earlier that you don't talk too much if you are sharing information that will impact lives. So, so that's very important. Very good information. Someone is saying it here in the chat. Awareness is key. So that's very important. And that is why we're having this kind of conversation. So Lady Wilson, I want you to weigh in on that in terms of education, what's going on at the early childhood level, because I know our little people,
yes,
once they get this information, mommy and daddy will know that I'm only supposed to do this at this age. So talk to us about what's going on at early childhood level where that is concerned.
So I want to support Dr. Thompson in the whole matter of the importance of educating our parents, and our children. And I would want to say too that our little ones are not too young to be educated on child labor. We can find creative ways to inform them, to make it come alive for them so that they can understand. And as you already know, whatever teacher says, that's how it goes.
Yes.
And so they can take it home to their parents and give them the information. I also would like to see our PTA meetings, having some aspect of focus on child labor. So not all PTA meetings we should be talking about, the school fees and, all those other things that we discuss. This is a particularly important topic that we should be discussing at our PTAs, inviting specialists in the area, like Dr. Thompson or another personnel from CPFSA who can give credible information, on this topic. And I also would like to say that, in the society at large, we need to be raising awareness. Just on June 12th, it was dedicated as Child Labor Awareness Day, but I'm not sure what was really done because nothing was out there in the media, nothing was on social media. I mean, we didn't have the discussions, so I think this is where we need to go. We need to be advocating for stronger policies. We need to be supporting our children who have also been affected by child labor. So I really think education has a great role to play.
If I may, I want to comment again. When we talk about education, it's not just about teaching content as, because, especially at the early childhood level, the children learn the the songs and the jingles and so on. And a former student of mine who is now a teacher actually brought her students to the JCDC Speech Festival this year, and they won a national award. So when they won the national award to a primary school, she sent me a video of them performing, and it was a dub poem, and it was about child labor. So on June 12th, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security actually had a student engagement on child labor in Kingston. And although they're in the country, I said, listen, you have to take your students to come and perform a dub on World Day Against Child Labor. And they actually came and they did it. I think that's one of the ways, in which youngsters learn about the issue, not only from the content in class, but as they learn about it in the extracurricular activities. And as Mrs. Edwards Wilson said, you see it on social media and so on. So there's a lot of sensitization that needs to take place.
Okay, fantastic. So we started by talking about, Lady Wilson started talking about the PTAs. Are there other civil society groups that could be a part of the process in terms of being more effective in identifying and addressing child labor? Any other civic society or local community groups?
You're muted, Mrs. Wilson.
Oh, yes. I'm saying I believe the churches can also come on board, and work along with our schools, with other community groups. We talk about our citizen associations, those groups that are quite active in some of our communities. So I believe every person, every citizen in this country has a role to play.
Indeed.
Awareness.
Right. Let's look a little wider, Lady Wilson. Are you able to identify any global trends that we could emulate locally where that is concerned?
I believe that in terms of our sustainable development goals, goal 8.7, it speaks to the elimination of child labor by 2025, and we're in 2025. And so the report is saying that we still have 138 million children that are still engaged in child labor, So we have a lot, we still have a lot to do, still have a lot to get done.
Yeah.
All right. We have a lot to get done. In terms of building awareness and all those different aspects, but what support systems are needed for families who may be at risk of pushing children into labor out of necessity? Dr. Thompson, and then...
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Let me mute. There's a feedback coming through. What support systems are needed for families who may be at risk of pushing children into labor out of necessity? You were sharing earlier about some things like that.
Right. So I think, our socioeconomic situation is one of the drivers of children engaging in child labor. How do I say this? Our social safety net needs to be robust. So I don't have the answer. I don't know, but and I think our country has been progressing in the right direction in terms of the macroeconomic framework and so on. But I think when it comes down to families on the ground, there's a lot of work that's needed to help families to be able to help themselves. And I think that's I mean, even when we look at the child protection issues that come to us, very often there are some real resource issues that are at the heart of the problems. And I think, I don't know how we're going to do it. Of course, strengthening our PATH program is one thing, but lifting our people out of poverty. And when I say poverty, I'm talking about not just not necessarily extreme poverty, but you have people who, yeah, they're surviving and they're eating and they might have some appliances and so on, but for the day to day they have to really hustle in order to survive, and they bring their children into that hustling culture. I don't know if you have non-Jamaicans on who understand what I mean when I say the hustling culture, but we have a real hustling culture here in Jamaica that many people, many children, many families are a part of actively, because that's how they survive, right? So we have to address that, right? I think that's, I don't know how we're going to do it, but that's, we might need to sit down and wrap our heads around how we address that. But I think that's at the heart of the issue.
Okay, Lady Wilson.
Yes, this is quite a tough one. What we find is that, child labor is so prevalent among families that are considered to be struggling families. So if we're able to provide maybe job opportunities, we talk about access to free quality education where we can include hot meals. I know we have some aspect of that taking place already, but we may need to look at how we can increase that initiative. Maybe we can also consider scholarships, additional scholarships being offered, and vocational training, which would encourage our children to remain in school, instead of seeking to work. Yeah, I think maybe we could just look at, some of those.
Okay.
I think she was the right person to answer that question.
let's hear what's going on in the comments. So Mrs. Ferran is saying we should involve the youth groups. Fantastic. Early Childhood Commission says correct, Mrs. Ferran, and even SDC. Brandy is agreeing here. We need all our stakeholders to be active in protecting our children and preventing child labor. It starts with each of us, you and I. Endorsement for collaborative efforts here. Amazing. All right, let's see what else. Assist with care packages. We have a lot of recommendations coming through. All right, Andrea saying strengthening our legal framework, addressing the root causes, raising awareness as we're doing here, and fostering collaboration, focusing on remediation and reintegration. All right, and we continue to the advocacy, Mrs. Wilson, appreciate those strategies, very practical indeed. All right, so you see why it's important to start the conversation, because the answers that we seek are among us. We just need to get the conversation going, and I hope that we'll continue the conversation after we leave here this evening. All right, so we now need to focus on how we shift mindsets and drive national change, because a big part of our problem is the mindset. Doc mentioned it earlier. It's become a part of our culture. So for some people, it's no big deal. This is how it's been done in the past. I never went to school for the 5 days of the week, and this is what I can afford, and I don't see any way else out. And if the government want me to do better, then they're going to have to find a way to make it happen. So let's focus on now how can public awareness campaigns be made more impactful, especially in communities where child labor may be culturally accepted or economically justified.
That's for me?
Let's start with Lady Wilson.
Okay.
And then
so yes, the shifting of the mind is really, really something that we have to, address. I think that parents and, generally speaking, Jamaicans, we need to understand that there are long-term arm of child labor, and so if we can get our people to recognize the negative impact that child labor has on our children, we would have started the work. You know, when we talk about it affecting them physically, psychosocially, and you know, all those other alleys. If we can get our people to understand that, then I think that's one way to shift mindset. We look at community engagement and the conversation, the discussion, this that we're having here, it has to be ongoing. We cannot stop, right? So we have to talk about it wherever we are. If we're at church, if we're in the office space with our colleagues, if we're in our community, at our community meetings, if we're talking, having a conversation with our neighbor, we need to be talking more about child labor. And I think that will help.
Fantastic. Doc?
Right. I think Mrs. Wilson said it. Everybody has to be speaking the same language, you know. So all of us. So your churches, your different service groups, the schools, all of us need to be talking about child labor. Getting our constituents to know that while some things have been practiced culturally, they actually harm our children, and in harming our children, we harm society in general, or by extension. And I mean, I think even the church is a very important partner in this fight, because a lot of things go hidden in church, right? Lots of things. So all of us have to be speaking the same language. In terms of getting the message out there too, I think there's one type of media that we have not been capitalizing on. And I'm talking about social media. Because if you go on TikTok or Instagram, everybody and their auntie and their uncle and their grandparents are there, right? I don't know if you've seen, there are some street vendors who, that's where they are. You know, they're selling the juice on the road, but while they're selling the juice, they actually have their Instagram live or the TikTok live on. You know, and people are watching them and engaging with them. Just the other day, I saw, a profile, or as it were, whatever it's called, but let's call it profile for somebody who sells tea in the mornings, you know, and she had a whole lot of followers. I think a lot of people are in those spaces, certainly in Jamaica, and we have not been reaching them because we think of advocacy in the very, traditional ways. But as we sensitize people, in the churches, in the community groups, on social media, as we do so, then they get the message and they themselves become advocates, because they may not be using, a large platform, but they may use the Instagram platform or the TikTok platform that they have. And note, I'm speaking of Instagram and TikTok and not X or Facebook, because there's a different kind of demographic that's on X and Facebook. But TikTok and Instagram has a particular demographic that I think we want to capture or capitalize on. And as we empower those persons, they can use their platforms as influencers to reach, the wider community. So that's the other thing too. We need some champions. We need people who are championing the anti-child labor message in their circles. So both at the the ministerial level, in the churches, in the schools, in wherever, we need some champions. Among the dancehall artists and so on, we need some champions who will say that, listen, child labor, it's not right. Yeah. So I think we have to really just capitalize on all the resources that we have to get the message out there.
Indeed. And you mentioned a powerful one earlier in terms of our using the culture clubs in schools, because that's where you find your champions. Because if they are incorporating these messages in their pieces, we have powerful empowerment on one of our contestants in the Miss Clarendon Festival, Queen, and talking about powerful, she did a powerful piece looking at a very important issue which aligns with this one in terms of domestic violence. So these are some of the spaces. We have our young people that's sharing on the different areas. So we need to get them involved because they are the TikTokers, and right, that we need to support spreading the messages. So we have to use all the different spaces around, because as someone was saying earlier, we have to reach people where they are. So we can't leave anyone out of the conversation. So we just need to, and it's the beauty about this 1 hour segment, you're able to utilize it, because if you see what ECC does each month, those little snippets, they're very powerful. And what happens is that people, their interest piqued, and they want to see more of the conversation so that they can get access to deeper information. So we continue this mission. All right. And Marie is saying, happy the conversation has started and in a simple way that all can relate to. Thank you so much for that. We try to keep it very practical in this space so that the information can continue after we leave here. All right, so what is your call to action for our viewers? Those who are here with us live and those who will be watching the replay. What can each of us do to be part of the solution? Lady Yvette. I see you're ready to go.
Well, I would say my call for action would be quite simple, and we have been talking about it throughout the conversation. Let's continue to educate, let's continue to advocate, and it's about time we act. We need some action in all of this, you know. I'd want us to be supporters of policies that are protecting our children against child labor. I want us to report cases or suspected cases of these incidents as we, may observe or see them throughout our day-to-day activities. And I believe that together, all of us in this space and all the other persons that we're going to be sharing with in the months and the weeks and the years to come, together we can break this cycle and ensure that every child has the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to thrive.
Well said, Doc.
Yes, I agree. Well said. I'm not sure if I need to say anything more. But every single person, every single Jamaican, pay attention to the children that are around you. Children should be happy. And a child who is working and is unable to really live out their childhood, is being deprived of opportunity, deprived of freedom, deprived of many things. So I want every single Jamaican, and the other thing I want to say too is having the policy is one thing and running the programs is another thing. But really to get societal change, we need interested and concerned citizens to pay attention to the children around them. And where there's a child who is in a child labor situation or is uncomfortable in the arrangement that they're in, or a child who is at risk, once you have a concern, don't be afraid to report it. Report it. Even if you can't name exactly what it is, report it and tell us what is happening to the child, and we can respond. But your responsibility is to speak up and speak out once you recognize that there's a child who needs help. That's my call to action.
Fantastic. And Andrea is saying, together we can.
Together we can.
And that's absolutely so, because each of us have our different platforms. We have our different community groups that we can continue the conversation in, and bringing the creatives among us, like powerful empowerment. Partnerships between prescribed agencies and citizens will get us where we need to go. That's right. And this has been shared throughout, the importance of collaboration, partnership in tackling these crucial issues in our society. All right, take some more comments here as our winds down. Love that, Doc. Children should be happy. If that's kept at our core, we will do right by our children. Let's keep our children happy and safe. Yes, because we're talking about breaking this cycle and culture, because growing up in some household, if there's this saying that chicken marry heart than ear, so
Yes,
which did not foster a culture where the children are to be happy.
right.
Imagine you say, I feel, I don't know if I'm too happy. I'm saying, no, that's okay. Children are supposed to be happy. It's
Yes.
good to be happy, and just continue to be happy and spread happiness all around you so that others can see that happiness is supposed to be a part of childhood.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yes, Andrea, let's us open our eyes, speak up, and speak out. Powerful.
Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts before we wrap? Doc, Lady
Well,
Wilson?
my commendations for discussing this as a topic, because very often, as I said, the child labor and exploitation of children is to some extent cultural, right? Children must work, and I think we have not benefited from those kinds of arrangements. So I commend the Serenity Resource Connector and the ECC for partnering to discuss what I think is a very important topic. As I said earlier, World Day Against Child Labor went and many persons did not even notice, right? So I welcome this opportunity to speak out about child labor. And many persons don't know what it looks like, but it is around us. We see the children on the streets, and sometimes it's happening in the homes, children who are working as domestic workers, and so on, because they have to. And I think all communities, all individuals have a role to play in their response.
Thank you. Kudos, Team ECC. I'm happy to be able to facilitate the process. Lady Wilson, you
Yes,
had something?
I too want to commend my organization, for this series. And since we started in January, we have really been getting some good comments from persons who have viewed and so on. And I think it's a very great initiative, and it is something that we need to continue.
All right, amazing. And I'm here for it.
Yes.
All right, and as the ECC says, nothing is wrong with a child working, except that play is a child's work. So anything outside of that is adult work. All right, excellent indeed, Anne-Marie. So let me thank you, Doc, for sharing virtual space with us here. And Lady Wilson, thank you so much for making the time to be here to share your insights, very important, and to generate the additional conversation so others could chime in the chat. And I'm sure they'll be taking the conversation offline, which is what we expect after these live forum. It's just to start the conversation. But it doesn't stop here. We have a full recap, blog recap on Monday on the Serenity Resource Connector website. So all the live forums that we have had here, we have a blog recap at serenityresourceconnector.com. There's a specific space for all the entire series that you can go and you can catch up on those things that you missed. No more than about 3 minutes to read, giving you the key information and the key resources that you need that you can take to utilize in your space, as well as the link so you can come back here to watch the full discussion. So remember to go ahead and share, and if you're not yet subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. And we have so many important discussions, conversations in this space each Thursday at 8 p.m. So you want to tune in for that. So this forum is on third Tuesdays. On second Tuesdays is the youth. There's a space for the youth. So we can start the conversation there as well. I will encourage that in that space. And then we have a whole host of other developmental. We have culture, and we have local governance and everything, community corner, where we talk everything community. I like important initiatives. And as a matter of fact, we are continuing similar to what's happening here. You had the day passed and many people didn't notice we're having this conversation now. Father's Day passed and everybody gonna forget about Father's Day until next year again. But no, we are having a focus on 2 fathers in Clarendon come Thursday at 8 p.m. So tune in for that, because that's what we're here to do. All right, so the commendations coming in for Doc and Lady Wilson. All right, thank you so much for those who are able to join us live, and remember to share the link so others can be a part of this conversation and keep it going. So feel free to leave your comments and recommendations so others can see it on the platform. So it has been my pleasure, as always, facilitating this conversation and the many others before and to come. And let me bid you all an awesome rest of the night as we look forward to working together to improve the spaces that we serve in. Very good discussion. Looking forward to the next one. All right, set your reminder, Stephen. Have a great one. A Child Rights Series 2025 Live Forum, Hear the Voices of Our Children, We Have Rights Too, is brought to you on third Tuesdays at 8 p.m. in collaboration with the Early Childhood Commission. Visit our website at www.serenityresourceconnector.com and subscribe to receive our weekly blog post. Join us again on Thursday at 8 p.m. for Community Corner. Thank you for watching.